Okay, in 3, 2, 1, and...
Hi, this is Steve Gillmor, and this is the Gillmor Gang. It's a beautiful Friday here in non-snowland, and we feel for all the people in the 30 states that are affected by the blizzard. And starting with, to my extreme right, not politically, of course, coming to us from New York is the editor-in-chief of CBS NewsOnline, Dan Farber. Welcome, Dan.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being had. And even further east, coming to us from the snowbound chalets of Switzerland, is the infamous Robert Scoble. Welcome, Robert.
Hey, how are you doing?
I don't know. How are we doing?
We're live and on Skype.
It's very cool. In our middle screen, from the fabulous anagram of Legs on Sale, is Danny Sullivan. Welcome, Danny.
Legs on sale.
Yes, that's an old fire sign bit about Los Angeles. If you deconstruct the letters, it adds up to the same thing.
But I'm in Orange County.
And your point?
Completely different area.
According to you. L.A. has, Orange County has sort of expanded to surround L.A. and then move up to Santa Barbara almost at this point.
Yeah. And you're in San Francisco, right?
If you want to call just north of Pacifica San Francisco, sure.
Well, I mean, it's close enough, must be.
Yeah. Okay, we've made that very clear. And joining us from somewhere in the heart of actual San Francisco is John Taschek.
Thanks, Steve. Good to be here.
All right. So, did we lose Scoble?
I should still be here.
Yeah, I can hear you, but I don't see you.
How about now?
Oh, there he is.
All
Yeah.
right.
And Danny, we lost. All right. Well, let's get started. Dan Farber, what's the scoop? What's floating your boat these days, technology or otherwise?
Oh, technology. I'm not that familiar with technology anymore.
I said or otherwise.
Busy, covering Egypt situation, and certainly a lot going on today. This week, it seemed to have quieted down a bit. Obama just came on and talked about how it's up to the Egyptian people to figure out what comes next. But there's a lot of discussion going on. Complicated situation. Lots of dominoes. Who knows how they're going to fall?
Has Katie Couric been over in Egypt?
She was in Egypt earlier this week. She came back yesterday afternoon. I think Brian Williams has been over there. So there's a lot of journalists over there, but it's quite a scary situation.
Yeah, I when I saw Brian Williams over there, I thought to myself, is that really a good idea?
Well, all of the anchors are coming out today.
The best way to reach me is to send email to Dan.
Sorry, go ahead.
I say all the anchors are coming out now because it is a little bit too scary and dangerous. We have people still there. They're stuck in their hotel room. They're not allowed to broadcast from outside. So any camera seen, looking at the squares is the police or the army will come up and confiscate it. So not a good place for a journalist to be, but yet they're there, and certainly people are pretty much up in arms about the treatment of journalists there because they're not allowed to cover the story. But it's kind of funny, and here's the technology angle. At the same time that one of the concessions that Mubarak makes is to turn on the internet, turn it back on, he stops the press, or his thugs or people in his administration stop the press from covering the event. So how do you reconcile those things? So I think it really shows how Egypt, has one foot in a very old world and one barely in the new world. And yet the new world seems to be having a great deal of impact in terms of the protests and communication.
Robert, where you are in Switzerland, are you? You were at Davos, and obviously that was early in the crisis, so there seemed to be a fairly muted response. What was your sense by the at the end
not able? Hello?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, we were pretty busy and not able to really fully capture the news while we're at the World Economic Forum. But the insiders, I mean, I was hanging out with Jeff Jarvis and Esther Dyson and all the techies, and they were certainly watching Twitter. A lot of us put on Al Jazeera and were watching the early hours of this news there. But yeah, most of the people there didn't have too much to say because they were just learning about the event at the end of the World Economic Forum.
And John Taschek, what's your take on
the Egypt situation?
Yeah.
I think it's
more the media situation as it relates to the
media situation. Yes, that's more along the lines of my thinking. The media situation is that an entity, a country, basically tried to shut off the technology, and how it reformed and news got out in a very quick way was really interesting. And it's also interesting to see how a company like Google, turned their telephone system into a mechanism where you could broadcast your tweets by calling up, so that some news could get out. I think that's just the way that technology, you're just not going to be able to shut down technology in that way.
At the same time, there's a whole discussion about, how Egypt really did shut off the technology and how easy it was to turn the switch off. They just told their ISPs, you can't allow traffic. And, there's been, the book came out, Net Delusion, in which he tries to make a case. Yes, it's a very... there are switches you can turn.
Right.
Against movements that are more, against the kind of regime in Egypt.
Exactly, and that kind of regime may form in the U.S. with the kill switch. I mean, a lot of people are making that analogy between the kill switch initiative and what Egypt did, but it just seems like, you can tell the ISPs to turn it off, but somehow it's going to reform. It's just going to, it will come back in some capacity.
Well, the cell phones, they sort of routed around at Twitter, and I think Facebook basically went through cell phones to deliver messages.
Yeah, ultimately, it's very hard to stop, and I think Egypt is a good demonstration about what happens when the internet. It doesn't really slow down the process in which there's some transformation going on. It can inhibit it in many ways, but I think it makes those people who are trying to get information out more creative and insistent, and especially because the whole world is watching.
Yeah, did it impact the way that you were looking at news yourself? I mean, how you're getting the news and monitoring?
We obviously like the other networks and cables had a lot of trouble. Our journalists were punched and maced. One of our journalists was detained by the Egyptian army for a period of time. This morning we were trying to broadcast and couldn't be outside, had to broadcast from within the hotel room. They've been confiscating a lot of equipment, so we got cameras and vegans and all kinds of things. We don't know where they are. But that's just part of reporting in this kind of...
vegans?
Not exactly a war zone, but...
what does food preference have to do with this? I don't understand.
No, it's a kind of dish, to communicate. Microwave dishes.
Oh.
And so a lot of what people are doing to communicate is there was one video place, but I think they shut that down. So just like everybody on the ground, you call through the cell phone, you call another country, and they try to route everything for you.
So it's kind of like the way that the internet grew in terms of reliability, not so much on any one node being up all the time, but just a sort of elastic kind of, 404 here, then you move here.
Yeah, mesh.
Well, there's lots of different networks, and while people talk about the internet and everything else, it's really SMS that drives a lot of what's going on.
Danny, I'm sorry you were dropped out for a second.
My computer crashed. Sorry, my apologies. It was so let me shut that thing down over there.
It was the kill switch from.
It's the kill
Cairo,
switch. It was. Microsoft really doesn't like me running Windows on a Mac, so it every so often just crashes.
Well, I want to come back to the whole media impact of this event, because it seems to be inextricably intertwined. It's as much about what we can do with communications as it is about what's actually happening. They're sort of irrevocably meshed together. But Danny, you've been involved in a media kerfuffle that started I believe on Tuesday, when you accused either Microsoft or Google, I can't remember which, of being a bad actor. Can you explain what that was about?
Well, Google accused them of being a bad actor.
And you were just their pawn?
I was their pawn in the whole thing. Well, so on Friday of last week, I had to go back a bit further. We've had this whole thing that's been going on about relevancy. And do Google search results suck, et cetera, things getting worse. And we had an article that ran on it, one of several, in the middle of January. And after one that we ran happened, I got a call from Google and talked with them a bit on some relevancy issues. And they said, hey, do you have some time to come up? We want to talk to you about some things that we've been looking at. So I'm like, okay. Sure, I go up to Google all the time, so I looked to see, when I could go, and I was going to go up on I think it was the 27th. It was a Thursday, and that ended up getting changed to the Friday of last week. So I ended up on Friday. I get there, I go through a bunch of different meetings that I had there, and at the end of the day, I go in and they said, we want to talk to you about this thing we've discovered, and they start telling me this story about how they noticed that Bing seemed to have some very strange matches that were very close to the things that Google was doing, or that were identical to Google. And in fact, that they suspected what was going on is that Bing, through people who are using Internet Explorer that's equipped with something like suggested sites or the Bing toolbar, was basically mining Google's data and understanding, if Google gave a search result back, what were the most popular search answers that they would report, and kind of send that stuff off to Bing so that Bing could use it. So then it got especially fascinating to tell whether or not Bing was really doing this. They created this series of 100 test searches for all these kind of fake words that you would never search for, and they actually changed their search engine so they could insert a result that they wanted to appear at the top of the search results, something that they've never done before. They've said they've never been able to do before. And so it was a sting operation. And when they got to the end of the sting operation that they started running in the middle of December, on December 31st, they discovered that like about 9 of the cases, this happened, that this result that they planted that you simply would not have gotten onto the search results for these particular words in any way were now showing up over Bing. So it was pretty clear that Bing was getting that information from Google, and they really felt like they had the smoking gun, and these are the nuclear weapon test sites, and we're going to go, and we just need to talk about this to the world because we think it was really unfair.
Dan, doesn't this remind you of the old days?
Certainly does remind me of the good old days. These search wars.
Yeah, but even before that, I mean, there was some event that Microsoft and Google was at, and they were having a fist fight backstage.
Well, so that's where this whole timing thing comes in, and the timing stuff's interesting, and I'll recap it, but I think it's almost beside the point. People want to go and pick up sides and go with it one way, like, well, Google did this. What happened was Microsoft had this big search event that happened on Tuesday that was to be, Microsoft is getting you all excited about search, and there were a bunch of different panels that were going on and a bunch of different speakers. And let's face it, it was a PR event for Microsoft. But it was a savvy one because as part of it, they had invited Google to be on a panel. And a panel that got even more important because of this whole relevancy thing that had exploded over this past month. And Google was going to talk about this on this panel. So they talked to me, and I was like, okay, this is a great story. I want to write about the story. If you guys are going to decide I can write about it first, I'm going to write about it.
Media stooge Danny Sullivan. I mean, it's
no,
incredible.
not really, though. I mean, people said that, and it's like, well, okay, so Google is going to accuse a chief rival of cheating in a way that is never done before. No, I shouldn't write about that. That would be stupid.
But what about, Danny, what about Microsoft saying, hey, everybody does it, it's not a big deal?
That is what they're saying. And it's what they said after the event. It's a pity they didn't say it more before the event, because then it would have been included in my article. On Monday, I'm like saying to Microsoft, okay, they're saying this, and they finally come back to me and say, yeah, we are doing that. We'll talk to you more about it at the end of our event tomorrow. And I actually just posted this morning now, Microsoft's side of everything. And their argument is, we think Google does all the same kinds of things. We think Google uses its toolbar, it mines data, it comes up with answers based on user behavior. And by the way, we're not copying anything. We're just, using user behavior in a smart manner. And why wouldn't we do this sort of stuff? So it's turned into a real he said, she said kind of situation.
Robert, you used to be at Microsoft. How do you think they're handling this kind of thing now? I mean,
it totally sounds like Microsoft to me, which is the old embrace and extend. Get as close to what Google is doing and do it as close to the edge as possible, and then figure out how to extend it and make it better so that you get the PR moving Bing's way. Yeah, totally sounds like old school Microsoft for once.
To me, this sounds like Google, playing Microsoft games. I mean, yeah, of course Microsoft does it, but it's almost like Google is reveling in the fact that they've caught them. That there's.
So they are reveling in it, and I think that there's a fundamental mistake that some people are making, that this is somehow a calculated PR game, and no mistake. PR is a big issue here, and these things that are going on, there's no doubt that that's happening. But Google, in particular, I think as a company, has always felt like Microsoft is evil. When they talked about don't be evil, Microsoft was what they did not want to be. They don't trust the company. They don't have a lot of faith in the company. They don't, they think the company will do anything. And in fact, when Schmidt was asked recently what he thought his chief competitor was, he talked about Microsoft, which was idiotic. His chief competitor is Facebook. I think that is the chief competitor, because that is the company that is doing the stuff to get into the areas that they are not getting into or that they are not succeeding with. Microsoft is the company that they're gaining on in many ways. But that's the point. It's like they still think we've got to look out for Microsoft. Microsoft is the evil thing.
Well,
and I think, but let me just finish. But this has come about because these Google engineers fundamentally felt like they spotted something that was unfair. It wasn't like PR came in and said, hey, cock up a story. We need to get something here. I mean, I know the engineers. I've talked with these engineers for ages. They fundamentally felt like there was something really unfair, and it confirmed their deepest, darkest secrets that Microsoft is just not going to play straight with them. And therefore, rather than pick up a phone and just call over to Microsoft and say, hey, what are you guys doing? They concoct this elaborate sting operation so that they can have the proof to walk into the UN of the blogosphere, stand out there like Colin Powell and say, this is why we need to run Operation Bingy Freedom or whatever. Yeah. But what happens is,
and then they find the most credible journalist in the space, you.
Sure.
And they run it up your flagpole, and then you're quoted in the New York Times, and all of a sudden it's a story.
Well, it was going to be a story. It was going to be a story whether or not I reported on it. They were going to talk about it at that panel.
Look, I understand. I'm just beating up on you.
But I've had people say this sort of thing, and it's like, all right. So what I did was tell the story. I talked to Microsoft a day before their event and said, this thing is going on. Do you want to talk about it?
See, now that's
Microsoft chose. I didn't it didn't just turn up. Microsoft deliberately chose that they did not want to talk about it in detail and that they would wait until the end of their event. And they gave me just a very short confirmation of it or whatever. So in lieu of that, I actually went and spent a lot of time trying to explain to people what I thought was going on, not just from Google's point of view, but that's from Microsoft. And if I did the follow-up today, it was nice because I was able to fill in the blanks that was confirming some of the things I was saying that might not make sense on Google's thing.
Right. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, this is very much like SAP and Oracle. You have the two giants in the space, and the search space is what, $30 billion. They're certainly going to take it personally, and I think, as Danny was saying, the engineers, especially Google engineers, they take it very personally, and I think that's why they did a honey trap instead of something, more sensible.
Right. I agree with that. I want to get back to one other thought, which is about the impact of Schmidt not being there. But Robert, you were saying something?
I just think it's funny because your boss was at the World Economic Forum, and I listened to him on a panel. And what does he do? He says, "I'm copying Facebook." He admits it, right? With Salesforce Chatter, and so he totally kills any argument, right? Here, Microsoft could have just said, "Yeah, we're doing whatever we can to catch up in this search game, and we're copying Google as fast and as furiously as possible."
You can see from the empty screen that we lost Danny for a second. Yeah, clearly there are several strategies in play. John Taschek, you want to talk about the Salesforce transparency strategy?
Can you lead me on a little more there, Steve?
I'll work on it. I'll send you an email. Remember email?
Yeah, with the Google and Bing and transparency, transparency is it's at the core of any company's interest, obviously, to be transparent about the way you operate. And any time that there's in the past, this was true too. It's just that so much more real time now that if you're not transparent, it just comes to light so much more quickly. And we obviously as a company are try to be as transparent as possible. We're always looking to improve how much more transparent we are. But I don't want to really talk about Salesforce. As far as the Google and Bing goes,
as far as Salesforce, it's interesting that Mark says he's copying Facebook, but he doesn't talk about Yammer or any of the smaller competitors because he knows that'll help his small and embolden his smaller competitors. I think that's what why Google is still chasing Microsoft in terms of PR, and they're not talking about Facebook because they don't want to embolden Facebook at all. They don't even want to admit that Facebook exists, even though they all know that Facebook is their #1 competitor.
Well, Facebook is the model that that Mark does talk about, and we all talk about as the model because it trains the masses, 600 million people, how to use a certain system in a certain way. Kind of like Windows did with the file menu, and what Apple's doing now with the iPad. It's teaching people how to use different devices. So that's what Mark's talking about. That's that direction we're going as a company. And we're not ashamed to say that. I mean, Facebook did teach the industry how to go that direction. And Facebook itself was influenced.
It's funny that Mark is very clear. I copied Facebook. He used those words. He said, great artists. What's the word? The phrase "great artists steal."
Yeah, right.
Picasso said that, didn't he?
Picasso says that. Right?
No, I think that was Picasso's quote.
Yeah, and he just gets out there and lays it out. I'm copying Facebook, and he lays it out exactly how you said it. That they're copying it because Facebook taught 600 million people a certain usage pattern, and you want to bring that usage pattern inside the corporation.
Right, and the other companies are not teaching people how to use that, how to train people. So there's no reason for us to go after it. I think it's a little different. It's different in a way from what you said. There's also another philosophy we have is that that whatever you define your enemy as, you become. And you see this in enterprise companies like at one time Oracle looked at Microsoft and said we want to become more like Microsoft, and they kind of became a little bit more like Microsoft. And then it was SAP. Then now it's IBM, and Google focusing so much on Microsoft kind of became like Microsoft. It's just the way that they became, and that's
absolutely. I'm hearing from across the company that they're having the middle management problems that Microsoft had, and that they're having the committeeism problems.
Danny,
that
when you were summoned to the Plex, who was responsible for this at the executive level?
Summoned which thing? The meeting at Google or the Bing event? I get some summoned.
The Google event.
Which executives were involved?
Yeah, any of them?
Oh, and let me say, by the way, I'll answer that, but it's also very personal back on the Bing side. I said that the Google engineers are very concerned. The Bing engineers are equally upset that they've had Google come along and just sort of suggest that all this hard work that they've done is on the back of Google. And their reaction isn't just a PR thing either. They're really like, dudes, we actually work really hard here. I spoke with Amit and Matt Cutts. There weren't any Google execs. Larry Page wasn't poking his head in around the corner and saying, are you guys doing all this stuff? In fact, I think they were all off at Davos, but I don't know.
Well, to me,
Larry was.
this goes back to something that I think Dan was alluding to when he suggested, and since he's right here, you can agree or not, when he suggested that there was that they may have not done the right thing here just in terms of messaging. Isn't that what the whole logic of Schmidt was, to have an adult present?
Well, Schmidt's still in charge.
Oh, please.
He is still in charge.
Oh, please.
Yeah, he is still in charge. But I think more to the point, I don't know whether or not any of the executives were consulted on how they wanted to handle this.
But that's my point. In an engineering culture, things basically get routed, laterally. They don't go up some sort of a hierarchy. There is no hierarchy here. That's my point.
I'm sure Matt Cutts knows very well what his executive management wants to have, how they want to be communicating, and how I'm sure he checked on this kind of deal because he has good instincts about what's going to make the top of tech.
Absolutely.
Google PR was involved, obviously, and Google PR was also present, but I don't know to the degree that it went up the flagpole and said, okay, Larry, we need you to sign off on this, or Eric, we need you to sign off on this, as much as it was, we're going to be doing this. I don't know. It's interesting. I might go back and try to get that clarified more.
Yeah, I just think that, regardless of whether we agree as to whether Schmidt is actually in charge or not, this certainly falls after the announcement. So to some extent, it's not on his watch anymore. It's really on Larry Page's watch.
I guess I will say the idea I think that Google had behind this was, I keep coming back to this UN thing, but I think it's a really good metaphor. I think they felt like they had something that was just so damning that everybody would just immediately think, wow, how could they do that? This ultimate thing. And, in reality, this has been kind of a PR nightmare for Google, because it has not gotten them a huge amount of sympathy in a lot of quarters. It's gotten them lots of accusations like, well, let me get this straight. You guys have a search engine that is built on copying everything across the web.
Right. And we want all your data. Thank you.
Right, whatever. Plus, their toolbar, which they initially had said, well, our toolbar doesn't do anything to impact our search results. As I wrote in the article, that's what they told me. And then I went back and I'm like, but you guys actually said that your site speed is part of your ranking algorithm. That's measured off your toolbar. So what else does your toolbar measure, and how exactly are you using it? And I'm still waiting to get an answer back from them. Yeah. And it may be that the toolbar is tracking all sorts of things, right? I mean, the toolbar is actually seeing the searches people do out on Bing. Because anybody who's running the Google toolbar with PageRank on, that's getting reported back. Now, Google may say that they're not using it, but now I feel like I have to go through and itemize every single thing that you could possibly think that the toolbar might be using, so that we can
tends
have a better
to bring
idea.
up conversations about Google's black box that aren't exactly useful to them.
Right. I mean, it's opened up all sorts of stuff where I think they felt like they had this big slam dunk that this was really going to do it. So, that also comes back to this whole, Google tried to do something, or it was all carefully calculated. Well, maybe it was all carefully calculated, but it certainly didn't go the way that they would have expected. I think that's fair to say.
So, Dan, I know you're out of this business and now into the larger media business, but doesn't this strike you as kind of a watershed we've got two huge stories here, and I'm not suggesting that the Google story is huge in specific, but I think it's part of a larger pattern that Google's been getting screwed up with for some months now. They seem to get involved in these kinds of messaging incidents that don't go the way that it's kind of like what Facebook went through for 3 or 4 years around trying to change their interface and where the data was going, etc. And now it seems to be Google getting in trouble. And then we've got this where's the data going across the world in a real-time environment where we're seeing the impact of some form of real-time communications. Whether it's obvious what the path is not clear, and how that's sort of becoming part of the story, and then receding as the events politically take over. Doesn't this strike you as a watershed for real-time communications and how it's beginning to impact on events and in some cases drive events?
Well, we've been seeing how tools like Twitter and Facebook, SMS, are increasingly becoming just embedded in the culture, especially as more and more people are connected. So I think that's just natural evolution. I think, as we talked about earlier, we're seeing in Egypt that despite the fact that they turn on or turn off the internet, information does get out, and it gets out at very rapid speed. One challenge is to know which information is accurate. In terms of connecting it to Google culture or what's going on between Google and Microsoft, I really don't know. I think there's two different things. One is big company-itis becomes big company-itis, so it's no different in any decade. As these companies get bigger, the stakes get bigger, they revert to kind of traditional standard defend your turf kinds of behavior. In the same way that Egypt's trying to defend its turf against people who want them to change or see a regime change. So it's all big business. It's big business in the sense that Egypt, its military, of which the cabinet are all members, and Mubarak, they controlled about a third of the Egyptian economy. They own resorts, hotels, industry. So it's the same.
Steve, isn't this really helping Google? I mean, I can see how the messaging seems a little sloppy, but all of a sudden we're talking about Google versus Microsoft, and that's a much better argument for Google to be in, or a much better fight for Google to be in, than Google versus Facebook.
Well, I take your point, but I think that what I just said before, which is that when you've got issues being raised about who's in charge of what data and who thinks that they own that data and who thinks that they can control that data to an outcome that, in the case of the situation with Danny, is it's a public relations gambit that they've turned this into. And I think many of us intuitively understand that everybody does this. Everybody is scraping everybody else within an inch of their life, and so what? I mean, if the results turn out to be the same, I mean, look at it from a search share perspective. So what if Bing improves their results by stealing their competitors' results?
Yeah, but when I've met
Steve... Is that going to really make any difference in terms of the overall balance of the percentage? People are going to understand that.
No, but it's messaging. It's sort of fun. When I met Steve Jobs in the street one year when I was walking around with a Microsoft executive, he said, "Oh, nice to meet the guys who are copying me." That was a marketing statement aimed at pointing out he's the innovator, you guys are the copiers, and Google is doing exactly the same thing here by positioning themselves as, oh, we're the innovators in this industry, which they rightfully are, and by making this a fight with Microsoft is copying Google and trying to catch up. That's a much better fight for Google to have us all thinking about and arguing about than, oh, wait a second, there's this young kid called Mark Zuckerberg, and he's kicking our ass in some new way, and we're not able to react to that, and we're not the innovators. And, what's going to be interesting is, does Google use this kind of technique against Facebook? Do they figure out some way to watch our social behaviors and build a social system off of something like what Facebook's doing?
John, you got a thought?
Yeah, I do. It's a lot of points are brought up. I mean, if Google had taken on, with this story here specifically, taken on Microsoft, in order to take on Microsoft to get into new markets and get into part of the conversation, it's a different conversation. They want to copy Microsoft in order to get into the enterprise conversation, but search results conversation probably wouldn't come up in that enterprise context as much, especially if they're doing a kind of direct sales or partner-led sales, maneuver here. What it does is the flip. It raises the awareness of Bing so much that they'll probably it came up in conversation 4 or 5 times, and it's come up even just today, 20, 30 times mentioned. I don't know if somebody can get a transcript, but where it would never have come up before. And so doing this actually had the inverse effect of raising Bing's awareness. Now, if they did this with Facebook, that means they're trying to get into the social space, but it's a social space that they should get into because of the ads, but it still doesn't help their enterprise story with the Microsoft. So they're kind of sandwiched in between 2 worlds here, and not doing particularly well in either of them.
Go ahead, Dan.
I don't really know where to begin. I think you can overemphasize the connection between them doing this to fight back on search, and that's trying to distance people thinking that they're not savvy on Facebook. I think they're doing this because you had some Google engineers that were really mad.
Yeah,
and
I agree with you.
That's completely, I guess I kind of still feel like, they do have a lot of catching up to do on Facebook, and, but yeah.
I gotta, Danny. I've heard angry engineers before having things stolen and copied. Almost always, if they go public with it, they've checked with a lot of people throughout the company.
Well,
I'm not saying they didn't.
Said that.
I'm not saying they didn't.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they just went off.
But this is a positioning statement. This is about causing the fight to be on a new front, and making search much more interesting than social. The whole industry has been totally focused. I mean, here in Germany, all we did was talk about Facebook and Twitter all week.
I completely disagree if you think that this all came about because they thought, wow, people think search is boring compared to social, therefore we need to concoct a fight with Bing. Although, it will make a fun movie now. But no.
All right, so which is it, Danny? You're saying...
I don't think that's the case at all. And in fact, the search team is going to be different than the social team, which is different from the Google Voice team, which is the...
I'm not saying the teams aren't different. I'm just saying this has us on the Gillmor Gang arguing about Microsoft versus Bing instead of Google versus Facebook.
Danny's right in the middle of it. That's why I'm talking about it. I mean, I'm kind of bored by it, frankly.
Right.
Not about this conversation, but about the Uber conversation, because as I said before, I think it's intuitively obvious.
But you know what? The conversation is
time.
Serious, and I've seen some people go, well, it doesn't matter. Look, we have had an entire month of people talking about whether or not the search quality of Google is better or worse, and if content farms are ruling the web, and all this stuff is going on. So, first of all, apparently, search actually matters to our lives, because everybody has been talking about it, or there's been a lot of discussion on it over the past month. And one of the things is, if we're going to talk about intelligently whether or not Google is worse or better, then we actually need to have relevancy metrics. And part of where this comes into being is, well, if Google's right, and if their relevancy is simply going to be mimicked by whatever Bing's going to be doing, then that is an issue. It's like, so then we're just going to have one search engine? Maybe we should have one search engine, we should know it or whatever, but it kind of comes back to the whole search relevancy aspect of stuff that's going on. And I think that is important. And I'll have to say, this is the biggest story I have ever seen. I have never had so many people read a story that I've written than this story, to my knowledge. I mean, the tracking that we have these days is much better than we had in the past or whatever, but I was stunned. I mean, I knew people would be interested, and it's got Hollywood spy stuff written all over it, right? But people,
well, it also brings back you back to 1999 during the DOJ wars that Microsoft was having. Microsoft was so dominant, and that's sort of what Google's playing off of. Is remember, that's the evil big Microsoft that was so dominant.
But I think that backfires on them.
And it did backfire.
Dan Farber, what do you think? Do you think that Google is coming under increased DOJ, introspection?
Well, they have been for several years. not just in the United States, but by the EU and across the world. And again, just as I was saying, as these companies get bigger, as they become more of a monopoly, even if they think that they're a beneficent monopoly, this just goes with the territory, that there's going to be extra governmental scrutiny, there's going to be competitors who claim things, and it just becomes more difficult and costly to manage.
Yeah, it seems to me like this so-called exploit is underlining the fact that Google is clamping down on other people's access to their stream.
No, I agree with whoever, I think was either Robert or Danny.
Well, it wasn't me.
This exploit was, some nerdy engineers who wanted to get back at Microsoft because they felt that their work was being dishonored.
I think this comes straight from the top, just like when Steve Jobs came up to us in the street. It is a war, and it's done. I think, if Vic and Dotra's fingerprints aren't on this, I would be very surprised. It sounds like the kind of thing that they're doing to refocus our attention.
All you have to do is look at what they talk about open in relationship to
I'm not sure what you're talking about, refocusing attention. They basically, crank out $25 billion a year in search revenues. Microsoft's share has been gaining, great. On the other end of it, you have Facebook ruling the social media world and Twitter out there, and certainly that presents problems for Google. But I think we just over-rotate on this. It was some engineers got pissed off. Larry Page is probably the guy who said, yeah, I support you guys. Let's do this honeypot and go catch these guys, and then we'll show, what cheaters Microsoft guys are. It's small.
It's juvenile.
Well, how much of it is actually, and I don't know much about the previous last week, wasn't there a bunch of stories that came out about Google search and SEO being SEO contaminated, and
yeah,
search
that's
results?
Danny's point, is that for the last month we've been hearing a drumbeat about the quality of their, if anything, what this, from Google's perspective, that they're trying to say is, look how good it is, Microsoft's trying to steal it.
Yeah, but is it a misdirection away from that, though? I mean,
that's what some people say. They did all this to misdirect the attention that's on that. And, perhaps they did. But in order to do it, first of all, they start, either they're lying about when they ran their test, right? Because they said they did the testing in the beginning, in the middle. They said they started doing this whole test in the middle of December, and it ended on December 31st.
It's just like the Watergate.
So they could be
Nixon
lying about
was brought down by the examination of the tapes, not what actually occurred in the break-in.
I'm not saying that this thing has gone the way they thought. In fact, I'm saying the opposite. I think it's gone.
I noticed.
I think it's gone completely opposite of what they thought was going to happen, and that comes back to them being this sort of myopic engineering. We think everything's black and white, and you can just see this kind of cheating thing. But that also goes back to tell you just how these conspiracy things, or this came down from Larry, or this was Vic's idea, falls apart. Because if you really were thinking this is what we're going to do to get them, then you would think, okay, wait a minute, if we start figuring out that they shouldn't be copying us, is there anything they could be doing to point to us, or does it open it up here, what's going to go on with the toolbar or whatever? Yeah. And I mean, maybe all those gears really were turning and going off that way, or maybe there's also another explanation that they just thought they found something that was really, really evil, and they didn't think through really much beyond that. In terms of what you said, Robert, and you think Vic's fingerprints are all over this, absolutely not. I would completely disagree. I would say this is the exact kind of thing you would expect Vic to put together, right? Vic's great, former Microsoft guy, knows how to get in those little digs against Microsoft and, kind of say that stuff and makes everybody laugh or whatever. That would be the kind of thing you'd think you do. This wasn't. This was Amit Singhal, who is like a co-equal executive with Vic in a completely different department, completely different area, who never have I ever seen him do anything like that. That's one of the hallmarks about all this. When people report on it, they keep going, wow, Harry Shum's very mild-mannered from Bing. I never expected him to start getting into verbal fight with Matt Cutts, who's very mild-mannered from Google, who I didn't expect.
You don't think You don't think all of the executives talk about this stuff on email?
They are now.
Yeah. Well, certainly now they are, but I think they were talking about it before.
What's
and
email?
I think,
it's the second time I've heard about that.
They, what's that? Email?
Yeah, we're talking about it. Somebody in the chat said, search is boring. It's last decade's war. It's still important, just like trains are important, but it's not glamorous anymore. Twitter and Facebook are where the attention is. Whether we agree with that or not. Email is not where this is going on. This is going on in real time. This is going on in press conferences that are being streamed. This is going on in Twitter. This is going on Facebook.
Gmail is pretty close to real time. I've been running my whole life for the last 2 weeks out of Gmail, and it's pretty real time sometimes.
Well, I understand, Robert, that you like to look at
the world. It's not quite as real time as the friend feed thing that we're looking at right here, but it's pretty close to.
I know. When are you going to come back to the United States so that you can get back to normal?
In 8 hours.
Okay, so you'll be off of email soon. Dan Farber, I want to get a little bit of insight before you have to run. What do you think is going to happen? It's Friday. Supposedly this was the, pardon the expression, drop-dead day for Mubarak.
I don't really have a clue. Today was a bit surprising because it was pretty quiet and less hostility than previous days. But it's pretty clear that Mubarak, Sullivan, and company are digging in their heels and looking for a way to preserve, their rule in some kind of transition that could lead to a more open election and changing amendments that would allow more people to run and be more inclusive. So it still remains to be seen whether that pressure will work or whether they'll just try to wait it out.
Okay, let's go around the table and wrap this one up. We have to cut this one short today. Let's Robert Scoble.
I think this Google trying to position themselves as innovator and point out that Bing is copying that, it's interesting. Personally, I don't even know where to go with it because it doesn't really matter that much. The real fight is with Facebook.
Danny Sullivan.
I think, Google probably just got another wake-up call that they are not the lovable brand that they sometimes think they are. And, they've got a lot of people who have a lot of fear about them, a lot of people who aren't happy with the things that they've done, and they just can't expect, even when they think they've got a whiz-bang, clear-cut case, that it's just going to happen. And that's probably a wake-up call for a lot of them, and a wake-up call that they need.
John Taschek.
I agree with Danny, and I come back to a point I made on a previous Gillmor Gang, is that there's something awry in the way that Google communicates throughout its organization that needs to be addressed, so that they don't have these issues going forward, or if they do, they can minimize it and mitigate them quickly. That said, that what's really interesting is that we started with Egypt and talking to Dan, and that's a really big, problem, a global problem, and I just think sometimes we got to step out of our myopia in the technology world and these fights that we maximize, even though they're kind of relatively small. That said, I'd like to minimize it even more by saying I think the Packers are going to win the Super Bowl.
Well, I'm going to challenge you on that. It wasn't very long ago that people talked about Twitter as a toy and didn't even talk about Facebook. It was a college, hookup network. And, I think that regardless of where the technology is enabled at this point in the Middle East, I think it has a central role in creating this momentum, this sense of dominoes falling, of hearing about how Gaddafi is on the ropes. That
I agree with you on that part. It's the Bing Sting issue that is that I think we're maximizing.
Yeah, but
that
but let me tie the two together. What we're talking about here is the economic engine of innovation in the technology community. That's what currently goes on around search. As Robert points out, it's moving into social. I don't think it's being dominated by social yet, but the quality of results has a lot to do with the people that you are following, and if I have to choose, we were in an interesting meeting a couple days ago with an analyst who showed a screenshot of, I think it's Bing, with the curated results in a little window, coming from what your friends are saying about, are talking about as far as the search request, and to me that looks like the donut hole that's going to turn out to expand to be the whole screen. What everybody thinks about what I'm asking about is going to be a lot less important than what the people that we follow and that they follow thinks about those questions. It's going to change things rapidly. Dan Farber, last thoughts.
Well, we were talking about search and Microsoft and Google, and I think the one area that's important is that hopefully there's really good stiff competition, because only that way will the innovations really happen that improve search and make it much more useful for people. And then in terms of Egypt and Twitter, Facebook, whatever, less is more. The ability to almost force people to boil things down into these 140 or 120 characters really helps, because you really have to get to the point. And at the same time, we do need the perspective and of the longer form, but as time goes on, things are becoming more imbalanced, that we get these great short bursts that are immediate and force you to really be thinking about what's going on now as opposed to reflecting back, but taking also the time to analyze and bring some perspective to those issues.
Yeah, and that brings up something that we'll talk about next time, hopefully. And I hope, Dan, you can come back a little more frequently now that you're actually paying attention to technology, even though you deny it. The whole influence of the iPad and its, copiers / cloners / competitors. As I was talking to Dick Costello at the end of the Crunchies. He's the CEO of Twitter, and his clear direction is that they're basing all of their interfaces on the iPad interface, not the other way around. That they think that they've gotten it closest to right on the iPad, and now they're going to bake it into the web version, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that that's going to be the canvas on which we navigate this combination of short bursts and longer form context is going to be, it's definitely the battleground. We saw the publication of the Daily this week, and a lot of noise around Apple locking down their store in terms of access to magazine content, etc. So I think Dan, you're right on it in terms of the importance of what we're seeing as a transition. I want to thank Rackspace, and particularly Rob Legess, for their support in returning this show to the air, or whatever this is that we're on. I want to thank TriCaster, Newtek, and their fabulous TriCaster for turning this into a video show. I want to thank John Taschek, Danny Sullivan, Robert Scoble, Dan Farber, and I want to thank our producer and director, Tina Chase. And I want to thank everybody who showed up, and especially those who didn't. We'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.